Let's keep exploring objects, and this lecture will bring us to object methods. So we learned that objects, just like arrays, can hold different types of data, and they can hold even arrays, and in fact, they could even hold objects inside objects. But now we can take it even further. And for that, remember how I said that functions are really just another type of value. And if a function is just a value, then that means that we can create a key-value pair in which the value is a function. And that then means that we can, in fact, add functions to objects. And so let's now see how. And once more, I will get back this object here, but we will change it up a little bit this time around. So here, let's simplify and just put the birth year. So just 1991. And I also want to add a Boolean here. Has driver's license. Just to show you that we can hold all kinds of different data types in one object. But now let's also add a function here as a key value pair. So to do that, all we have to do is to add another key here. And the function that we want to add is again the calc_age function. So that's one of the favorites, as you can see, but it is because it's a very simple calculation that we can do with the birth year. So to do that, let's simply add the name basically of the function here as a key. So as a property, so calc_age, and then the colon. And now here we simply specify the function as an expression. And that works because the expression produces the value. And so we can just do this. So function, and just like before, we pass in the birth year, and we return 2037 minus the birth year that was passed in. So this is pretty similar to simply writing this, right? So a regular function expression. So const calc_age like this. This is how we used to do it before. And so you see that this is pretty similar. The difference is just in the syntax, because now calc_age is not a regular variable like here, but it's a property of the Jonas object. And so therefore we use the colon here, but the rest here is exactly the same. And so that's why it was very important that you understood what a function expression actually is. Because here we need the function expression to create this method. And that's what this function is called. So any function that is attached to an object is called a method. So of course we could have not used a function declaration here. So something like this. So function calc_age, for example, that would not work. We would certainly get an error here. So unexpected token function, because this is a declaration. And so it doesn't work here. Here we need an expression. And so this will work indeed. Okay, does this make sense? So if you can think of functions as simply being values, then you can see that a method is actually also a property. It just happens to be a property that holds a function value. So here we have a string value, here we have an array value, here we have a Boolean value, and here we have a function value. All right? So I hope that's logical. And now, just like we can access any other property, we can also access the calc_age property or method. So Jonas.calc_age. And so calc_age is now the function value. And just like any other function, in order to call it, we use the parentheses. And now we can pass in the year here. And so that should then calculate our age. And let's just log this result to the console here, just to see if everything works. And it does indeed. Okay. And you could also have accessed this method using the bracket notation. Because again, it's just as if it was a normal property. And the brackets would actually be necessary here. So that this then here is the function, and then we call the function using the parentheses. So let's try that. And yeah, here this needs to be a string. So like I showed you in the last lecture, and now here we get 46 as well. Okay, so just like I showed you in the last video with the operator precedence table, the first thing that happens here is that Jonas.calcH is computed. And so this here will become the function value. And then with the parentheses, we call that function value here and pass in 1991. And the same thing here. So here we access the property calcH using the brackets, and then this here will basically be replaced with the function, and then we call the function right here, just like before. All right. Now, you might have noticed that the birth year 1991 that we passed here as an argument to the method is actually already defined in the Jonas object itself up here, right? So we already have this information in the Jonas object. And so writing the same number here and here is not ideal, because we might make a mistake and pass in the wrong year. For example, right here. So Jonas's birth year is 91, but here we could, for some reason, accidentally do 92, and then it would be wrong. And even if we do not make any mistake, this is still not ideal, because we are not keeping the code dry. So we're violating the don't repeat yourself principle. So if we know the birth year of Jonas, it should only be written in one place, not in multiple places. Because if that might change, then we have to change it everywhere. That's always the philosophy that we need to keep in mind. So what if we could actually access this birth year property directly from the Jonas object instead of having to pass it in? Well, it turns out that we actually can. And that's because in every method, JavaScript gives us access to a special variable called this. And so what we can do now is in this calcH function, we can read the birth year directly from this object itself without having to pass it in as a parameter here into this function. All right, so let me copy this and comment this one out just so that we keep a record of what we did. But this here will be the new version. So now we no longer need this parameter, and we will read the birth year directly from the object. And for that, again, we will use the this keyword. So the this keyword, or the this variable, is basically equal to the object on which the method is called. Or in other words, it is equal to the object calling the method. So let's see who is calling the method. So down here is calcH, and the object that is calling the method is Jonas, because that's where the dot is. And let's forget about this one. I'll actually comment it out here. And so again, the object that is calling the calcH method here is Jonas. And so that means that inside this method, the this variable or the this keyword will point to Jonas. And so let me just write this.birthyear here, and then I can explain it even a little bit better. So here we don't need to pass the 1991 here, and I will run this now, and we still get the correct result. So great. And to make this even more clear here, let's also log this to the console. And indeed, this is the whole Jonas object. And so again, that's because the Jonas object is the one who is calling this method, so this function. See here, it's Jonas.calcH. And so whatever appears before the dot is the one who is calling the method. And so therefore, in the method, this points to Jonas now. And if this points to Jonas, then this.birthyear is of course this value that we have right here. Great. So you see that the this keyword is something really, really useful. And we will learn even more about the this keyword in greater detail in a later section. For now, I just wanted to introduce you to this concept. And I know this can be a bit confusing, so really make sure to maybe pause the video and really analyze what's happening here. Maybe you can even rewind a little bit and hear my explanation again. That might be useful too. Now, you might argue that maybe we don't even need this confusing this keyword. Why not just do Jonas.birthyear here instead? Well, because that would actually still violate the don't repeat yourself principle. It would work just the same here now, but then let's say that we need to change the name of the object. So we change it here to Jonas2, and then we call Jonas2 down here. And then the code will no longer automatically work. Because now Jonas is not defined, of course. And so we would have to keep that in mind and then come here and manually change this as well. While if we had the this keyword, then everything will keep working without us having to change it there. Because now this will simply point to Jonas2, because that is the object calling the method. And so therefore, it's always a good idea to reference the object itself and not hard-code the name of the object. So let's put it back to Jonas. And yeah, much better. So this works great already, and we're really going into some more advanced territory here. So I hope you're still following me and you're still making sense of everything. However, we can actually even take this a little bit further. But don't worry, it's not going to get a lot more confusing. Just a small variation of this. Because let's say that we need to access the age multiple times throughout our program. So that would be like calling this a couple of times. So let's say in 3 places of our application, we need to access the age. And so, of course, this will work. And indeed it does. And it always locks the Jonas object because we still have this here. So this makes it a bit easier to view. And so what happens here is that the function will get called a total of 4 times. And so this computation here will be done 4 times. And in this case, that's not a big deal, but it might be like a heavier computation that actually takes some more time. And so it would be a bad practice to do this multiple times. Instead, what we can do is to just calculate the age once, then store it in the object, and then when we need it at a later point, we can then just retrieve the age as a property from the object. So I hope you're following me here. So I will again copy this and comment it out so that we keep all the 3 versions that we did here. So what I was trying to say is that we can now use the this keyword also to store a new property. So we can say this.age is equal to this here. So we calculate the age, and then we create a new property on the current object. So in this case, on the Jonas object. And remember that we can use the dot notation like this to create new properties. So we did that in the previous lecture as well. Where was that? Yeah, right here. So here we created Jonas.location and set it to Portugal. And so here we are essentially creating Jonas.age and setting it to this age that we just calculated. And then we can simply return this age. And of course, we don't even need to return anything if we didn't want to. We could make this method only calculate the age, but not even return it. But I think it's a good practice to actually also return it. And so now here we can replace the function call with simply a request for the age property. And notice this trick that I did here again with the command D, right? So this gives me multiple cursors, and then I can do one operation in multiple places at the same time. So that's a really handy shortcut. So again, command D or control D, and in the menu bar, that means add next occurrence. So let's test this, and the result should be the same. And it is. but we only needed to calculate the age once. Then from here, we simply retrieve the property that we had already calculated before. And so this is the most efficient solution, let's say. All right, and now I actually have another small challenge for you that you can do just in this video. So I want you to write a method called getSummary, and this method should return a string which should kind of summarize the data about Jonas, or of course any other person data that you might have used. For example, let me again, actually we can get rid of this. So let me write challenge here again, and then do an example string. So I want you to write, for example, this. Jonas is a 46-year-old teacher. And we now could actually add all the data here to the string, but that would be too much work. And I'm a bit lazy now. So let's just also say if I have a driver's license or not. So Jonas is a 40-year-old teacher, and he has a driver's license. And it says that I have a driver's license because has driver's license is true. But if it was false, then here it should say, and he has no driver's license. So it's either A or no. So figure out how you can do that. And so I hope you managed to do it. It's a bit similar to what we did in the previous lecture, but this time I want you to actually write a method on your own. So give this a try, and I see you here in a second. Okay, so let's add getSummary. And remember that you need to have a comma between the properties. And so that's true also with methods. So here we need a comma, and then just a function. And it will then get all this data, of course, from the current object. So actually, let's first call this method. So, and we're doing it inside a console.log because, of course, we want to be able to see the summary string as a message in the console. So Jonas.getSummary. Okay, so which is the object calling the method? It is Jonas. And so therefore, the this keyword inside of getSummary will be Jonas. So I hope that this one is clear at this point. So let's now build a string here. And starting with the name, it is at this dot first name is a, and now the age. So this, and now what do we do here? Should we use the age property, or should we do calc age? Well, I would say that we should do calc age because we cannot assume that calc age was already called before. Okay, and if we don't call calc age before we call getSummary, then the age property would not exist. And so it's better to actually do calc age here. And so I think we did this before. So in a template string, we can easily do a function call. That's not a problem at all. So this.calcAge will call this other method, and this will then return the age. All right. And maybe it might be strange for you to call the function also on this, but well, the rule is just exactly the same. This is Jonas in this object. And so this is essentially the same as writing it here. All right. So this will become the age. And so year old, and now the job, Jonas.job. And he has, and now we need to decide between a and no. So let's do a ternary operator here. So we get this dot driver's license. And basically, if it's true, then we want the result of this operator to be A, and if not, we want it to be no. And then driver's license. Okay, makes sense? So again, here we want either A or no, depending on the state of the has driver's license property. So we get that property by calling this dot has driver's license. And here we're using the ternary operator. And so if this first part is true, then the result of the operator will be A. And otherwise, the result will be no. And so that's what will then be put into this place of the sentence. Okay. And we already called the method down here, and we logged it to the console. And so I think this should work now. And it does. So Jonas is a 46-year-old teacher, and he has a driver's license. Now just to test, let's set it to false. And he has no driver's license. Beautiful. Okay. And yeah, that's all the code that I had to show you in this video. And now just to finish the lecture, which I know is already running quite long, but I want to basically build a bridge between this method and the array method lecture. So remember that we used methods on arrays previously. So we can quickly go there. So it was before this challenge. Yes, indeed. So for example, here we have friends.push. And so we have an array, and on there we call a method. So just like we did in this video. Now what this means is that arrays are actually also objects. They're just a special kind of object. And so they have functions, or in other words, they have methods that we can use to manipulate them, like push, pop, shift and unshift, and many more. All right. So in this lecture, we created our own methods on our own objects. But here we basically used built-in methods on arrays. And so once again, that means that arrays are actually also objects. That's why they can have methods as well. And we will dive deeper into why things work like this, but I wanted you to realize this early on in the course. This is quite a complex topic, and so there is really a very exciting journey still ahead of you. So I hope you're enjoying this journey so far. And now to test your knowledge, there is coding challenge number 3 coming up next.